problems there, because what happens, I mean, I'll tell you a situation, the story that was in the paper, the Boston Post in America, a good
Right.
few years ago. I think it was possibly in the war years or in the 40s. I don't quite remember. But there was a guy called Phineas Gage, and he worked for a railroad company where they were laying railways across the country. And he was a foreman. He was a very respected man, leader of his team, and the company that employed him, I think, felt he was about their best ever employee. Well, they obviously had to blast stuff away to make a way for the railroad to go. And he was tamping some powder, some explosive powder, to do just that, when all of a sudden the powder exploded. Now, what happened is the tamping pole he had, it was 3 feet, I think to be precise, as I remember, 3 feet 7 inches long, and it was about an inch and a quarter in diameter. So it's a pretty wide pole of that length as well. Well, when
Right.
when the powder exploded, the pole entered his face through the side of his cheek. It shattered his upper jaw, went behind, all very quickly, all this, of course, went behind his left eye, came out the top of his head. So you can imagine that the hole that was made, and it then landed about 25 yards away. Quite an incredible thing. Now, Phineas Gage wasn't the first man to have a fractured skull, but he was the first man or first person to ever not only survive it, but incredibly, he remained conscious throughout. Quite
Wow.
incredible. And anyway, obviously the emergency happened, and this was the story as told in the Boston Post. The first doctor to arrive, I can't think of his name, it may have been a Dr. Williams, but anyway, he asked Phineas Gage, what had happened, and he explained it all in perfectly normal talk, incredibly, which made the doctor think, well, I think he's confused. I think he's deceived on this. This can't have happened, as he said. But then, when Gage stood up, he vomited, and as he vomited, the pressure, the action of doing that, expelled another about a half a cup of tea, half a cup full of his
Yeah.
brain out, and of course there was already some out there.
Ooh.
So, but he remained conscious. Anyway, so then, of course, the doctor he recognised the gravity of this whole situation. Well, anyway, his case was actually looked at by a Harvard professor who noted that this was the most important thing about this case was its improbability, and he said it's totally unique in the annals of surgery, historical surgery, totally unique.
Yeah.
Anyway, Gage's own doctor monitored him, and after a couple of months, he gave a report to the effect that Gage was doing well. He was walking about the house. He was free from pain. Obviously, he'd had surgery to try and repair the hole and all the rest of it. But anyway, he said he was doing well. And the last line of what the doctor's report said, he's doing well if he can be controlled. Well, this was
Wow.
looked into more. Now, of course, he hadn't gone back to work, but gradually, although he was, on the face of it, returned to what he was, in reality, he wasn't. And this was now manifesting itself in his behavior. He became very obstinate. He was a good, decent man, I believe, a religious man, and he looked after his team when he was very obstinate. He was a good, decent man, I believe, a religious man, and he looked after his team when he was working, and of course he had a family. But it turns out that he became not only obstinate and difficult, but he started using the most gross profanities in his language. He was never a swearing person, but he was now doing this. and becoming basically thoroughly objectionable to people around him, such that I think a few months after the event,
Yeah.
his friends, colleagues, I don't know about the family, they don't say, but his friends and colleagues and acquaintances said, "This is no longer Phineas Gage, not the Gage that we knew." And I don't know what happened to him in the rest of his life. He obviously went on, he lived, I've got no record of him dying. He obviously has died since then, I imagine. But it
Yeah.
was a quite a unique case. But the point that it makes, I think, in an interesting way, is that if the brain is damaged, it totally affects our behavior. Even a small brain injury can can do that. Neuroscientists, doctors, they've long since mapped the brain. You can look at a picture of a brain and you can go around and it tells you what is responsible for all the different things, optimism, the arts, talents, all the rest of it. They know where these things happen. But even a small injury can totally affect someone's behavior, as we see in things like Huntington's and other things like that. And of course, since that incident, which I think now it was the late 1940s, I believe, since then we've had lots more evidence of what happens with people having strokes, brain aneurysms, degeneration, and so on. And people can see the dementia is another one. The the effect of a tiny injury in the brain can totally change somebody's personality. Now, why do I tell that story? I think simply because it does illustrate a pretty powerful fact that what we are, our personalities, all those things we talked about, everything about us, they are dictated to by this incredible mechanism, this thing in our heads we call the brain. It's more incredible than any human could ever describe. It is just, and it makes us incredible life forms, to put it that way. I mean, we won't say aliens. I know you say you don't believe in aliens, but in many ways, we are aliens, depending on where you're looking at it from. But we have these incredible bodies. And when watching football at the weekend, as you did, I expect, I certainly went to a game on Saturday, but you see footballers, rushing around, crashing into each other, being kicked up in the air, all sorts of pressures, and yet they're